Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to part 2 of the Dominaria United set review for both limited and constructed. This episode is going to be covering all the cards for blue, everything for common, uncommon, mythic, and rare. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it as we continue on. We're starting with the commons, and our first card up is Academy Wall. For 2 and a blue, it's a creature wall, 0/5 power and toughness with defender. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is definitely playing into the defender deck archetype. You'll be able to see that this is definitely something they want you to build in limited or constructed. I think it reminds me a lot of like Wall of Mist or something like that. 0/5 for a defender with a triggered ability once each turn. I think though, because in limited, it's going to be hit or miss if you're going to be able to get enough instants and sorceries to make it work, unless you're going for a dedicated defender deck, that you'll get maximum value out of this. I think because of that, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a low rating in limited. But I think if you were building around it with a dedicated defender deck, you could probably say medium. But overall, I would just go low for it. I think the same thing for constructed. Once again, unless you're building a dedicated defender wall deck, or a deck that uses creatures that deal damage equal to their toughness instead of their power, it would be pretty limited outside of those deck types. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and just give it a low rating. It's definitely good for staving off early aggression, but probably not something I would put in my deck on a regular basis as a starting creature. So next up we have Essence Scatter. This is a reprint, been in many card sets. It's Essence Scatter. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target creature spell. Glad to see it back. It's a really useful card. I think it's definitely something I would, if I was playing blue, I'd probably have this in my limited deck, drafting or sealed. Because limited decks are centered around creatures so much, it definitely has a decent value. You'll be able to cast or be able to use it and cast it. It's not going to sit in your hand for long, and your opponent has a really annoying creature or something you don't want to see enter the battlefield. This is a good card to save and you use against them. I think I'm going to go ahead and give this a mid rating for limited. Like I said, it can be pretty useful there. For constructed, it depends on the type of deck you're playing. I think I'm going to go ahead and give it a mid rating there as well. It is useful in tempo decks and in control decks, and definitely decks that utilize counter magic coming in from the sideboard. So it's just a welcome addition for any blue mage, because it's so versatile against one of the most common spells cast in Magic, and that's creature spells. So mid for both of those. Next up we have Haunting Figment. It's 1 and a blue creature illusion, 2/1 power toughness with vigilance. When Haunting Figment can't be blocked as long as you cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn. Interesting card. I could see this fitting into a tempo deck really well. Something that kind of keeps your deck on schedule, and you're either bouncing your opponent's creatures back to their hands or shooting stuff off the board or blowing up an artifact or something, making this a card that is hard to deal with. And the fact that it has vigilance, that's pretty good. You're able to keep it as a defender as well. So I kind of like it. I think I'm going to go ahead and give it a mid rating for limited. I think there's many uses that you could find for this card, and it could fit in that type of deck, the heavy instant sorcery deck or tempo style deck, to get the most use out of it. I'm going to give it a low rating for constructed though, just due to the fact that it is kind of fragile. It's a 2/1. In constructed, there's just so much access to decent removal that I don't see it making that big of an impact. So unless you're building around something that involves this creature on a higher level, like an all vigilance deck or something like that. So yeah, probably just a low rating for the constructed rating for it. Next up we have Impede Momentum. For 1 and a blue, it's a sorcery. Tap target creature and put 3 stun counters on it, and then scry 1. Pretty cool. I like the play on the stun counters for what they're doing. It kind of replaces the old freeze mechanic in this set. The fact that each stun counter having to be removed replaces the untap for that permanent. So in this instance, it's for the creature. The only thing is it's a sorcery spell, so that's probably the only drawback I see with it, though. Other than that, it gets to lock down your creature for 3 turns, and then you get to scry for it. So fairly decent. I think I'll give it a mid rating for limited, just due to the fact that it can lock down a creature for 3 turns. Is pretty useful. I mean, if you're able to lock down their best attacker for 3 turns, that could be the difference in the game. I'll give it a low rating in constructed, just due to the fact that once again, constructed has access to just an endless library of really efficient removal spells, or spells that can impede your opponent's creatures. So this wouldn't be at the top of the list, but you know, it can be effective. But for now, I think a low rating is good for what it is. Next up is Impulse. This is actually a reprint from long ago. For those of you who are playing Magic, probably haven't seen this in a standard legal card set since Visions, where it originally appeared. I think this is the first time we've seen it in standard legal card set since then. So back then it was a really popular card, and I think this will be a widely used card again. So it's Impulse. For 1 and a blue, an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. It's pretty good. It's a better version of Anticipate. Anticipate only lets you look at the top 3. This lets you look at the top 4. Choose the card, put it on the bottom of your library. So yeah, this is a decent card. I think I'll give it a mid rating. Gives you, for limited, it gives you access to dig deeper into your deck to find an answer if you need it, or something that you can use to filter through your cards at the end of your opponent's turn. I'll also do the same for constructed. You'll definitely see this card used in many control decks, many decks that cast a lot of instants and sorceries. This is definitely a good card to use to get those kind of triggers. So all around, it's pretty solid. Definitely a good card. Next card is another reprint. Negate. We've seen this one. I think it's been in a standard for a long time, and it's going to continue that run. So Negate is 1 and a blue for an instant, counter target non-creature spell. Yeah, this is a decent card. I think for limited, it's a little less useful than it would be for constructed. It's just due to the fact that there's more creatures played in decks in limited. It's definitely a card you'd probably bring in from your sideboard versus actually starting it in your main deck. So go ahead and give it a low rating for limited, but barely. I mean, it's been a favorite. It's been a useful card for years, and once you get that in your deck, and you know your opponents are playing non-creature spells, this is perfect for it. So, but I'll give it a low rating for limited. I'm going to give it a higher rating in constructed, just due to the fact that constructed, you see so many different deck types, and you see a lot of decks that play non-creature spells, and it's definitely useful. You know, you can counter the Wandering Emperor if it happens to flash into play, or any other annoying planeswalker. So definitely a good card to maybe have a copy in the main deck and bring a few more in from the sideboard. So just a powerful reprint. Glad to see it still going to be in the standard format. Next up, we have Phyrexian Espionage for 2 and a blue to sorcery. It has kicker for 1 and a blue. Draw 2 cards. If the spell was kicked, each opponent discards a card. Interesting. Yeah, so it's a card draw spell. It's pretty much a divination with a discard spell attached to it. So pretty good. I could probably see this being run in a few decks. Probably more constructed than limited. So I think I'm going to go ahead and give it a low rating for limited. It's not something that you're going to see used a lot unless you build around it. But if you do, I would definitely maybe rate it a little bit higher. I'd put it in the mid rating. But it's definitely useful. The fact that you're getting card draw and your opponent's having to discard a card, that's pretty good. But just due to the nature of limited, I'd probably give it a high-end low rating. For constructed, I'm going to give it a mid rating, just due to the fact that in a very heavy instant and sorcery deck, control deck especially, Dimir deck, which this naturally fits into, it just fits in nicely. Gives you the card draw and some discard element that can really just disrupt your opponent. So a little more powerful and constructed for the way this card plays out. So give it a mid for constructed. Next card is Pixie Illusionist for 1 blue. It's a creature, fairy, wizard. 1/1 power and toughness. It's got a kicker cost of 3 and a green. It's got flying. If Pixie Illusionist was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So it actually ended up coming in as a 3/3. You can tap it to have target land you control become basic land type of your choice until end of turn. Yeah, I remember they used to have cards like this back during the invasion block, so it can be pretty useful. It can give you a little extra boost for the domain deck type. Something that I would definitely keep in mind if you're building that type of deck. It's got flying, good evasion, and then it's also got a kicker that makes it stronger, makes it bigger and stronger. I think I'm going to give it a mid rating because of that, just due to the fact that it contributes to so many different deck types for the type of decks you're playing. That being, tempo decks, flying decks, +1/+1 counter decks with the evasion, and then also for domain. I think for constructed, I'll give it a low rating, just due to the fact that in constructed, it probably won't survive long, just due to how fragile it is, and it would be total mana value of 5 to cast it and kick it. That can be kind of slow and constructed. Might work better in a commander deck, so that actually might work, but it'd probably be a low end of the options for including it in a deck. But like I said, it does have evasion, and it does have a boost with the kicker for +1/+1 counters, and it can give you an added bonus to your domain style decks to use. So pretty good. Also, the fact that if you need, can help fix your mana too. I guess the fact that if you need that blue mana or an extra green or something like that, you can tap it to turn one of those lands into that land type in addition to its others. So good for, I guess, mana fixing in that sense. Next up is Shore Up for 1 blue. It's an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Untap it. That's pretty powerful instant for just 1 blue. Can save a lot of your creatures when you need to against any kind of a removal. And the fact that it has the ability to untap the creature at instant speed, that's an ambush against your opponents. That's pretty solid. Let's see here. I think I'm going to give it a mid rating in limited. That's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's fairly decent for it. And then for constructed, I'm actually going to give it a mid rating in constructed as well. As good as the creature removal and disruption is in constructed, this card foils a lot of those plans. Timely casting of this card against on one of your creatures can save it from a removal from your opponent. Also, there seems to be a lot more creatures that are being printed that benefit from you targeting them with an instant and sorcery, and this just adds to it. to whatever those creatures do. So like a good example is Illuminator Virtuoso from Streets of New Capenna. Has double strike and it connives whenever you target it with a spell that you control. So this would be a perfect card for it. So definitely like it. Yeah, that's a good addition for the new standard coming up. Next common is Soaring Drake for 2 and a blue. It's a creature drake. It's a 2/3 power and toughness with flying. It's pretty much just an upgrade from Wind Drake that you've seen in a lot of previous sets as the best common blue flyer for the most part. I think it's definitely good for if you're building a flyers deck or an aggro deck with where evasion helps out your deck. This will be solid. I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited. Overall, it's just a good deck. I mean, or sorry, good card. Just a better version of a lot of the previous blue common flyers that we've seen in the past. But like those blue flyers that we've seen in the past that are common, for constructed, I think I'll give it a low rating just due to the fact that it is vanilla other than flying and doesn't do much else. There are other flyers that even in this set that will score a higher rating for constructed that I think would take up a slot in the constructed deck. So just beat out by its more diverse cousins, if you will. But so I'll give it a low rating for constructed. And then the next common is Talus Lookout for 2 and 2 blue. It's a creature, human pirate for 3/2 power and toughness. It's got flying. When Talus Lookout dies, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Yeah, this has this would go really well with maybe a deck that well, it's got good evasion. Goes well with a deck where you want cards in your graveyard, or if you need to filter through your cards to get a decent card selection, this helps with that. I think for limited, I'm going to give it a mid rating, just due to the fact that it does have evasion, and it does give you card selection for when it dies. You put card into your hand and then one into your graveyard. So does give that kind of selection ability. For constructed, I think it might just be a little too slow for what it does. It does have a fragile body, so it probably could die pretty easily to removal. Although that does enable its death trigger a lot quicker. It does have flying, but I think at the 4 mana value spot, it is a little slow. But it might fit in with a tribal deck though, human or pirate or something like that, like maybe or a commander deck that utilizes its abilities or creature type. And the next common is Tidepool Turtle for 3 and a blue. It's a creature turtle, 2/5 power and toughness. You can pay 2 and a blue to scry 1. It's got pretty much for 4 mana. It's just a 2/5 big body that lets you scry for that extra mana. Or I'm sorry, extra. Looking at extra cards. I think I'm gonna, just due to the fact that it's kind of clunky. I think it's something you could include in your deck if you just needed a playable, but I'd probably put that at the low end for limited. One benefit though is it does have a high toughness, so that could be good for clogging up the ground if you need to stunt your opponent's aggression. And it does have 2 power, so it can kill quite a few creatures in that respect with low toughness. I'll also do the same for constructed. Just kind of too slow, clunky card. Something you would see played more in sealed deck or limited than constructed, just due to the nature of it. So yeah, I'll give it those ratings. Next up is Timely Interference for 1 and a blue. It's an instant. It has kicker for 1 and red. Target creature gets -1/-0 until end of turn. If this spell was kicked, that creature blocks this turn if able. Interesting design there. And then of course you draw a card so it's a cantrip for 1 blue. And -1, -0, and then if you kicked it, it forces a creature to block. So kind of an interesting form of creature removal. If you've got a big creature with a decent toughness and enough power to kill your opponent's creature, it's a good way to force them to go smashing into your creature. Wow, let's see. I think I'm gonna give it a mid rating for limited. It's definitely got a lot of uses. I could see this being used, forcing creatures just to smash into larger creatures, and then you get to draw a card off of it. So, I think I like it for that rating for limited. For constructed, I will just give it the low rating. It's not something you'd see in constructed that often, unless you're maybe playing a really dedicated instant sorcery deck for some weird kind of deck type, or something you might see in Commander. This card definitely, I think, has a more suitable home in limited. Maybe if you were using card draw in constructed, that might be something where I could see it being used. But other than that, I'd probably see this card more as a limited card with a better rating in limited. So next up is Tolarian Geyser. It's 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Has a kicker for white. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Draw a card. If this spell was kicked, you gain 3 life. That's pretty good. Even though it's a sorcery, it's a bounce spell with a card draw. I think when I first saw this card, I really had to think about it, and I think it reminds me of its cousin from the original Invasion block, Repulse. The only thing is Repulse was an instant, so that was a little better, but this, though, with the kicker edition, lets you gain 3 life, so this can be pretty good for breaking up your opponent's defense if you're playing a tempo deck to try to keep your creatures on schedule, or just to mess up one of their strategies. If they just cast a big creature on their turn, you can play this on your turn to bounce stuff back to their hand, kind of setting them back a little bit. After thinking about it, I think I'm going to give this a high rating for limited, just due to the fact that it bounces a creature, draws a card, gains you 3 life for 4 mana. That's pretty good. Thinking of it in that sense, yeah, it definitely is something you'll want to do for 4 mana's worth. For constructed, I'm going to give it a mid rating. It does all of that, but it's just dealing in a much more faster formats with constructed, but you still are able to get the benefits from it. So I think mid seems to be just right for where it is. If it was an instant, I would probably give it a higher rating, but still a pretty good card. I like that. Moving on to the next common, we've got Tolarian Terror for 6 and a blue. It's a creature serpent, 5/5 power and toughness. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard, with ward 2. Wow, this is definitely a build around in limited, and fits into those instant sorcery spells decks and constructed. But you would be able to cast it for pretty cheap. I'm going to go ahead and give it a mid rating for limited. You get enough instances of sorceries in your deck, you'll be able to cast this for pretty cheap. Maybe end up casting it for 2 and a blue, 3 and a blue. That's still pretty good for a 5/5 body and ward 2. And if you're lucky, just cast it for 1 blue late in the late game. So I think that's pretty decent for it. It's a decent card, decent body. Ideal card for mid to late game against your opponents, and the fact that it has the ward triggered ability, that's pretty good. I think I'll also do the same thing for constructed. I could see a lot of decks that have heavy instant sorceries in their decks, and this is just a card that benefits from it, so you're able to just throw it out on the board for cheap. And the same reason, it's good 5/5 body with a ward ability on it. So I think it's a good mid-level spell or mid-level creature for what it does. So next up is Voda Sea Scavenger, 2 and a blue. Creature Merfolk Rogue for 3/2 power toughness. Has domain. When Voda Sea Scavenger enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among the lands you control. You may put one of those cards on top of your library and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I think this would be better if they let you put the card in your hand, but it doesn't. Just lets you select a card to put on top of your library and then put the rest on the bottom. X could be at most 5, so it does give you that card selection, but I think for its toughness and for what it does, I think the best I want to give it is a low. Same thing for constructed. Gosh, it just, for all that, I think it would be really fantastic if you could put that card into your hand instead of just on top of your library. So we'll go low for Vodacy Scavenger. Something you could probably have in your deck as a filler, but if there were better cards available at the three mana drop spot, I might take it over this. Just depends. Really just depends on what you have available for you as far as your creatures. I believe this is our final common, Volshe Tide Turner. For a 1 and a blue, creature Merfolk Wizard. It's a 1/3 power and toughness. You can tap it to add 1 blue, spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell or a kick spell. I think we've seen versions of this in the previous Dominaria set. Had a similar style ability. I know we've seen stuff like that for only being able to cast artifacts. It's pretty good Merfolk mana dork. Something that can help accelerate your board state if you need to for kick spells, or just have that extra mana to cast an instant or sorcery. So I'm gonna give it a low rating for limited. It's gonna be better in a build around. I'd probably give it a mid rating for build around, but for just a 2-drop filler, I think there are probably gonna be better cards. But yeah, like I said, if you're playing a lot of kick spells, though, this could be a good mid card for you. So something to think about. But low for limited. For constructed, I think I'll also do low, just due to the fact that so many options in constructed for mana acceleration, mana rocks and stuff like that over something like this. So, but it's a good slot filler. Might go well in a Merfolk Wizard deck, something like that. So I think we'll leave it at that for constructed. Alrighty, moving on to the uncommons. We have Battlewing Mystic for 1 and a blue. It's a creature bird wizard for 2/1 power and toughness with flying. When Battlewing Mystic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, discard your hand, then draw 2 cards. Interesting. So for 1 and a blue, it's just a 2/1 flyer, but add that extra red and you can discard your hand and draw 2 cards. Yeah, that's could be pretty decent. Late in the game, you have nothing in your hand, you cast this, and then you draw 2 cards. That's pretty good. I think I'll give this a mid rating for limited. Pretty decent flyer. It's 2/1 for 2/1 2-drop flying. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then has that kicker ability. For constructed, I'm going to give it a low rating. There are just better creatures you can play in the 2 mana value drop spot, or 3 for that reason. Yeah, it does have flying and evasion, and card draw if you discard your hand, but a little fragile, probably be shot down pretty easy, but decent card. But it's just got so crowded in constructed as far as options to use. Good bird wizard though, so if you're playing a tribal deck or a flying themed deck, this might fit in well with it. But I think for now I'll give it a low, but pretty decent for limited. Next up is Combat Research for 1 blue. It's an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. As long as the enchanted creature is legendary, it gets +1/+1 and has ward 1. Yeah, you're able to make it connect and deal damage to your opponent. It could be pretty good. maybe putting on an unblockable creature or something like that. Definitely plays nicely with all the legends that are in this format, giving him +1/+1 and ward. My instincts tell me to give it a mid rating, so I think I will. Because there are a lot of legends in the Dominaria United Limited, and it's something you could probably be able to get that second ability pretty easily. The first part, as far as dealing damage to a player, draw a card, just depends on how combat goes, but it's definitely an extra benefit. So yeah, I think mid's good. For constructed, I'm going to give it a low rating. It can just be, in constructed, creatures can be blown off the board so easily. It's hard to keep them with enchantments on them. Even though it has ward 1, if they have that extra mana, they'll be able to pierce the ward shield and then kill the creature. So I think low for an enchantment aura in constructed is accurate. There might be better card options available, unless you're playing a specialized enchantment deck for constructed. Next up is Coral Colony for 1 and a blue. It's a creature wall, 1/4 power and toughness with defender. Pay 1 and a blue and then tap it. Target player mills X cards, where X is the number of creatures you control with defender. So, I think I would probably, if you were playing in a dedicated defender deck, this could be really powerful. I would probably give it a mid to high rating, but that's in a build around. For if it's just a blue creature you have in your deck, I think I'd probably give it a low rating, because it's somewhat limited. But for a build around, I think it'd be more deserving of a high, or I'm sorry, a mid to high rating. For constructed, maybe in a commander deck, this would warrant a higher ranking at the mid level, with a dedicated commander creature strategy, especially one that lets you attack with defenders or deal damage equal to their toughness instead of their power. That would be pretty good. But overall, I think outside of those decks, I think it's just a good 1/4 wall defender, and with a mill ability. But I think I'll probably leave it at that for the constructed rating. Next up is Djinn of the Fountain for 4 colorless and 2 blue. It's a creature, Djinn, 4/4 power and toughness with flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, choose one. Djinn of the Fountain gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Exile Djinn of the Fountain, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, or scry 1. So yeah, this is definitely a card that utilizes having a lot of instants and sorceries in your deck. I can see it working in a tempo style deck or a heavy instants and sorcery deck. It's got the evasion, good 4/4 body for 6. I do like it, because of what you can choose from it too, with its modular abilities, 3 different ones to choose from. It kind of has a pseudo prowess trigger, and then you can exile it to save itself if it needs to, by casting an instant or sorcery, or even if you have some kind of card draw ability and you cast that, then it'll trigger. Let's say you choose the third option, to scry 1. You can scry 1 first, then that instant and the sorcery would resolve. So it kind of lets you set up that card draw ability with the scry 1 to get a better look at the deck. I think I'm gonna give this a high rating for limited. I really like it. It's 6 to cast, but it does do a lot of stuff, and it is a 4/4. So I think it's pretty solid for a limited card. For constructed, I think I'm going to give it a mid rating, but it would probably be a low end mid rating. I'm, maybe, yeah, I think mid is right. I think you'll see this more in a commander style decks, for stuff that works with instants and sorceries and flyers and things like that. For standard or pioneer, explorer, legacy, modern, all that stuff, I don't think you'd see it that much. It'd probably be more towards the low rating, but because of what it does, and I think it's a useful creature to have, especially in a commander deck. I think it earns that mid-level rating, so we'll keep it there at the mid rating for commander, or sorry, constructed, leaning heavy towards commander. Next uncommon is Urte's Scorn for 1 and 2 blue. Instant. The spell costs 1 blue less to cast if an opponent casts 2 or more spells this turn. Counter target spell. It's an interesting design for a counter spell. It seems to be angled more towards fighting against aggro decks or decks that drop a lot of permanents or cast spells, multiple spells in a single turn. So it's definitely useful in that sense. So yeah, you want to kind of let them cast that second spell and then pay the price for it by countering it with a cheap counter spell. I think I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited. It fits well because limited deals with a lot of creatures, and sometimes your opponents are dropping multiple creatures in a turn. So yeah, I think I would do that. Same thing for constructed. It might be something you bring in from a sideboard, or maybe just have one of in the main deck to combat their aggression. This kind of stunts what they're trying to do. So pretty decent card. Better when they cast their second spell, obviously, but it's a hard counter too. That's also something I should point out, that it's not conditional. It just counters the spell, period. So decent card. So the next up is Founding the Third Path. I think this is our first saga for blue. It's 1 blue and 1 colorless to cast. It has the new ability for saga cards called Read Ahead. I'll go ahead and read it. I mentioned it in the first video I did for white, but I'll go ahead and do it in here. Read Ahead is choose a chapter and start with that many lore counters. Add 1 after your draw step. Skip chapters don't trigger. Sacrifice after 3. So basically, if you read ahead, you can start with that many lore counters on the saga, but any saga chapter that you had skipped past, those don't trigger at all, and you just start with the chapter that you skipped ahead to. So this one reads, for chapter 1, you may cast an instant and sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. Chapter 2 is target player mills 4 cards. And chapter 3, exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Copy it, you may cast the copy. Interesting card. Sagas I always find interesting with what you can do with them. It's definitely conditional and definitely build around. I'm going to give it a low rating for limited, just due to the fact that it's something you really got to dedicate. Benefiting from having cards in your graveyard, having instants and sorcery spells that only cost 1 or 2, and then being able to cast them on chapter 3. So you definitely got to set it up to make that work. I like it with a better rating in constructed, just due to the fact that it does make you have to dedicate certain mana value spells to your instant and sorcery deck. Goes really well with flashback cards, so it might be something that works well in that constructed area. And the fact that you're able to exile an instant and sorcery card from your graveyard and copy it, so that's kind of a free cast with its saga trigger. So I think we'll keep it at mid for constructed. Next up is Frostfist Strider. It's for 3 colorless and 2 blue. It's a creature, elemental giant, 4/4 power and toughness with ward 2. When Frostfist Strider enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Yeah, that's pretty solid. Good 4/4 body with a ward protection, and it taps one of your opponent's creatures and keeps them from untapping for a turn. It's basically the freeze, tap and freeze ability. I like it. I think it's going to be better in limited than it will be in constructed. Because of that, I think I'm going to go ahead and give it a high rating, just due to the fact that it has some pseudo removal built into it, and it has a decent body to attack with or block, and it's going to be hard to get rid of because of the ward ability. I'll give it a mid rating for constructed, just due to the fact that 5 is gets kind of pricey once you start to get up there in that range in constructed. You go really well in a commander deck, especially with a bunch of creature stalemates. So kind of gives you the ability to move something out of the way and attack with it. So I think I'll go with a mid rating for constructed on it. Okay. So next one is Joint Exploration for 1 and a blue. It's an instant. Has kicker for green. Scry 2, then draw a card. If this spell was kicked, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Interesting card. First thing I think of is Growth Spiral. Although this is, I think, a little bit more expensive, if I remember correctly. Although this looks like Growth Spiral doesn't let you scry 2, so yeah, that's a pretty cool card, pretty decent. Get a little bit of good stuff for everything. Scrying, drawing a card, and then putting a land onto the battlefield. Nice thing is it also can be a land card, so that's any land type, and you can put it on the battlefield untapped. So that's pretty solid. I'm gonna give it a mid rating for limited. That's something that you could definitely find useful to use at the right time if you're in these colors. So pretty good for what it does. I think for constructed, I'll also give it a mid rating. Scry 2, draw a card. If you're playing a ramp deck, this is a really great card for it. So for that type of deck, so just slots right in nicely. So pretty good. And even if you're not playing a ramp deck, just the fact that you get to scry 2 and draw a card, and you don't kick it or anything like that, that's pretty good for 1 and a blue. I'll take it. We'll keep it there for constructed. Next up is Micromancer. For 3 and a blue. Creature, human wizard for 3/3 power and toughness. When Micromancer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card with mana value 1. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. I think this will probably be more useful and limited than it is constructed. Lets you get your maybe 1 mana removal spell, or maybe some kind of card draw, cantrip, or something for that sense. I'll give it a mid rating for limited. For constructed, I'm going to go low. Yeah, it does have an ETB effect, and lets you get an instant or sorcery, mana value 1. Well, it's tough to say. This might be better, actually. I think I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it to a mid rating and constructed as well, because in some of the older formats, this is perfect, especially in like Legacy or Modern and Commander. Probably maybe not as useful in Standard or Pioneer or Explorer, just because there's not as many 1 mana value instants and sorceries available versus some of those older formats. So but it's good, you know, it's got a decent body, 3/3 for 4. I like it. I'll take it. We'll leave it at mid for constructed. Protect the Negotiators. For 1 and a blue, it's an instant with a kicker for white. If this spell was kicked, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each creature you control. So this is kind of interesting. If you kick it, and you have no creatures, this will give you that creature. So they'll at least have to pay 1, and otherwise the spell is countered. And of course, if you have an army of creatures, they're going to be having to pay more for it. So I can see this definitely in a white-blue tempo style aggro deck with a lot of creatures, or even just a creature token deck. And this is one of the cards that benefits from having a lot of creatures. So I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited, and for constructed, I think I'll also give it a mid rating. I think I would give it a mid to low end rating, just due to the fact that there are a lot of other spells you could probably put in the 2 mana slot, but it might fit into the right style deck. You might find it useful with a huge creature token decks, or decks that spit out a lot of creatures early on, and you have a lot of them on the battlefield. So I think I'll go mid for both of those. So I think this is our last uncommon before we hit the rares. Rona's Vortex for 1 blue. It's an instant. It has a kicker cost of 2 and a black. Return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of its owner's library instead. Wow. So for 1 blue, you can bounce a creature or planeswalker back to its owner's hand. It has to be one you don't control. Or you can strand it at the bottom of their library for 2 and a black. Yeah, that's an interesting way they designed that card. That's pretty cool. Definitely has 2 modular uses. And if they've got something that's just driving you crazy, you never want to see it again, you can send it to the bottom of their library. I think I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited. Actually, I'm going to change that. I'm going to do an audible and give it a high rating, just due to the fact that you can bounce any creature or planeswalker you don't control, return it to their hand, and if it's a real problem, you can send it to the bottom of their library for an additional 2 and a black. So it's pretty good for limited. That can actually be the difference in a game. For constructed, though, I think I'll just go mid-range on that. It's definitely useful. 1 mana bounce spell. But there's going to be so many highly efficient cards for constructed. It's definitely something that's kind of muted a little bit in constructed. Although this is pretty cool for commander. You could, if you're able to kick it, you could send it to the bottom of their library. Most of the time, your opponents are going to choose to return the commander to their command zone and tack on an extra commander tax. If you wanted to, and you only had a little bit of mana available, you could send it back to their hand. But I could see this being a really cool card to use in the commander format, just to really stifle your opponent's advancement, especially with their commander. So pretty cool card. I like it. Has a lot of uses. Just depends on the format you're playing it in. Okay, so let's see. Moving on to the rares. Our first rare is Aether Channeler for 2 and a blue. It's a creature human wizard with a 2/1 power and toughness. When Aether Channeler enters the battlefield, choose 1. You can create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying, return another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or draw a card. Wow, this is a really nice modular card gives you all sorts of choices for just for 2 and a blue. That's pretty good. It can essentially become a mana war. I don't know if you guys remember that card from originally printed in Visions, that when it entered the battlefield, you can return a creature to its owner's hand. Make a 1/1 white bird creature token, so that's useful, or just draw a card when you need it. Yeah, this is a solid card. I like it. I'm going to give it a high rating for limited, and I'm also going to do the same and give it a high rating for constructed. This really has a lot of great uses. If you're able to blink this card continuously, wow, it could just go off and do some crazy stuff. So a lot of versatility for this card. I definitely like it. So much you can do with it. So I think it's worthy of the high rating for both limited and constructed. Next up is the Defiler for the blue color. Defiler of Dreams for 3 and 2 blue. Creature, Phyrexian Sphinx. The 4/3 power and toughness with flying. As an additional cost to cast blue permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 blue less to cast if you pay life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of blue mana you pay. Whenever you cast a blue permanent spell, draw a card. Yeah, this is a solid card. All these defilers I think can be really good, regardless of the format. I'm going to give it a high rating. For limited, you're playing a blue X deck. You got a lot of blue spells. You can be able to cast them for cheap, and if you've got ways to gain life, this is going to make it easier for you to cast your spells. Plus, you can be able to draw cards from it. In constructed, I'd also give it a high rating. First thing that comes to mind is a blue devotion deck. You can go off with a card like this, and you're going to be drawing cards each time you cast the blue permanent. So blue devotion, first thing that comes to mind, really solid. Of course, you know, this can fit into any other deck that plays blue, but the fact that you're able to play the blue parts for free and just pay life gets even better in Commander because of all the life you have. And if you have excess life gain, you're gonna be doing well. So I think high for both of those. Next up is Haughty Djinn. It's for 1 and 2 blue. Creature Djinn. Star/4 for the power and toughness. Flying. Haughty Djinn's power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Wow, that's pretty good. Definitely a build around. This is definitely something I would pick high in limited or as a pick and start building instants and sorcerers around it, because they're just going to get cheaper for you to use, and it's got evasion for only 3 mana, and it just gets bigger power for that. So another high rating card for limited, really solid. Same thing for constructed, just due to the fact that it gives the its power is equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard. First thing that comes to mind for cards in standard is Lear, Drowned Disciple, giving you access to that gives you access to all your instants and sorceries in your graveyard, giving them flashback. This card, though, seems to fit in with that kind of theme, and whenever you cast those spells, they cost one colorless less to cast, so that's pretty good. Definitely an efficient card for what you're casting it for. So we'll give it a high rating for both of those. Next up is Silver Scrutiny for X and 2 blue. You may cast Silver Scrutiny as though it had flash if X is 3 or less. Draw X cards. I'm gonna give it a mid rating for limited. Something I might have in the deck, just for late game card draw. Pretty good. I think I'll do the same for constructed. This is something I'd only have 1 of in the deck, but you can cast it as an instant with if X is 3 or less, or if it's in the late game and you need to refill your hand entirely, just go off and have X be greater than 3 and just fill it up. So definitely a good utility card draw spell for constructed. Next up is another saga, the Phasing of Zalfir, 2 and 2 blue. Has read ahead. The first 2 chapters are both another target non-land permanent phases out. It can't phase in for as long as you control Phasing of Zalfir. Chapter 3, though, is destroy all creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller creates a 2/2 black Phyrexian creature token. Wow, a blue board wipe. That's pretty wild. The cool thing is the first couple chapters, you're able to save your creatures due to the impending arrival of the Phyrexian tokens and the total annihilation of the current creatures on the battlefield. Interesting card. I think this might actually be better if you have your creatures and you kill all their creatures and they just have the 2/2 tokens left. But this could be a problem if you just skip to chapter 3 right away and you don't have many creatures and they do. It ends up just replacing their threats with 2/2 threats. So it's going to be a situational type of saga. You're going to have to time it right and see how it goes. But it's pretty cool. Pretty cool flavor, that's for sure. I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited. It's really going to depend on how the board state is with the way this card's going to go off. Same thing for constructed. Just depends on how you set up the chapters, and how the third chapter goes off will determine the outcome of how effective this spell was. So I'll give it a mid for both of those. Okay. So I think we're on to our last rare here. Vodalian Hexcatcher. 1 and a blue. It's a creature merfolk wizard for 1/1 power and toughness with flash. Other merfolk you control get +1/+1. Sacrifice a merfolk, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. Yeah, this is a really good merfolk lord. I think this will be an all-star in constructed. Just due to the fact that it's got flash. Other merfolk get +1/+1. That's really going to mess up how your opponents calculate blocking if you're attacking them with merfolks. Just due to the fact that it gives a boost to all your merfolk creatures, and then of course you can sacrifice them to foil any of their spells that they cast by sacrificing a merfolk. Because I'm not sure how many merfolk are in the Dominaria United limited format, I think I'll give this a mid rating. I think it's going to be most powerful in a constructed deck, and I'll give it a high rating in constructed, because if you have a merfolk tribal deck, that'll give this card a really good chance to shine and use its abilities. So limited, mid, and constructed, I'll go high. It's definitely a solid card. Awesome flavor, awesome mechanic. Definitely see it being used in some of the older formats for constructed. Also for commander. Oh, wait, I was wrong. We have one more rare. Vodalian Mindsinger. For 1 and 2 blue. It's a creature merfolk wizard. 2/2 power and toughness. Has kicker 1 in a red and or kicker 1 in a green. Vodalian Mindsinger enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 encounters on it for each time it was kicked. Well, that's interesting. So it could actually enter the battlefield as a 4/4 for 7 total mana. Let's see what else it does. When Vodalian Mindsinger enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature with power less than Vodalian Mindsinger's power for as long as you control Vodalian Mindsinger. Interesting. Let's see here. I think if you're able to kick this just once, it might be pretty useful. If you're able to kick it for both kicker costs, it's even better. It'd be a 4/4, but it's going to be a situational scenario with how well this card plays out for you and what's on the battlefield. But anytime you're able to gain control of one of your opponent's creatures, that's pretty good. Tough to say. I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited, just because you never know what the power and toughness will be for, or the power will be for creatures your opponents have on the battlefield. And it varies widely in draft and sealed, just due to the variation in creatures that you're going to see. I think I'll do the same thing for constructed. It's a card that, if you're not careful, it can be blown off the battlefield pretty easily. And however, though, it can get a lot of the low-costed, low-powered creatures that you're going to see in the early game for constructed. But as the game goes on, it becomes less and less useful. So we'll have to see. I think for now, I'll leave it at mid, but maybe later on, this card could be a high rating for how well it is in constructed. So next up, we're into the Mythic rares now. Sphinx of Clear Skies for 3 and 2 blue. It's a creature Sphinx, 5/5 power and toughness with flying and ward 2. That's pretty strong already. It has domain. Whenever Sphinx of Clear Skies deals combat damage to a player, reveal top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So it's basically, I don't know, for some of you longtime players, the card that comes to mind is Fact or Fiction. Basically, if you have all 5 land types, it is basically a Fact or Fiction card. If you have less than the 5 basic land types, it's not going to be as good. So this is definitely going to, you want to have all 5 basic land types to be able to get the most value from this. But yeah, when it deals combat damage, that's another thing too. It's not just ETB. It's deals combat damage. You're able to reveal the top X cards of the library. So each time you deal in damage, it's with this card, it basically triggers a Fact or Fiction card. That can be pretty powerful, especially for a deck that wants cards in the graveyard and in your hand. I remember way back in the day, a lot of the domain decks had that kind of strategy. So I think this would be a pretty powerful card. I think I'm going to give this a high rating in limited, just due to the variance in limited. To get the max value for it, it's will be kind of hard to do, but it's still worthy of a high rating. It's something that could win the game for you. I'm going to go epic though for this in constructed, just due to the fact that if you're building a domain deck that utilizes cards in the graveyard and cards in your hand, it's got flying, ward 2. You back this up with a little bit of counter magic, it's going to be almost impossible to defeat. So, and you're able to blow up your opponent's creatures with some efficient removal. This could win the game for you. So, really strong card. I love the flavor behind it. For longtime players, seeing it have a triggered ability upon combat damage, that being Fact or Fiction, it's a really cool card. Brings back a lot of memories. So definitely worthy of the epic rating. Next up is Vesuvian Duplimancy. I believe this is our last mythic, so last card for blue. But Vesuvian Duplimancy, it's for 3 and a blue. It's an enchantment, mythic rare. Whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. I don't know if you remember earlier on in this video, I mentioned that they seem to be printing more cards that benefit from you targeting them with your instants and sorceries. I believe that card was Shore Up, and that could actually, that's just another card that goes really well with this card. So yeah, it's pretty powerful. If you're able to build a deck around this in limited, that's going to be amazing for you. Just creating a bunch of tokens that are of some of your best creatures. I'm going to give it a high rating for limited. I like the idea behind it. It's just going to depend on if you're going to be able to get enough spells that target your creatures or artifacts. Same thing for constructed. I think this could go really well in Commander and be really, really strong. Oh yeah, I think maybe I'm going to change this. No, I think we'll keep it at high. We'll keep it at high. But yeah, this is something you can build around for constructed. Being able to take advantage of token generation and making copies of your best creatures and best artifacts. So we'll see how it plays out. I think we're going to see a lot of exciting uses for it done in Commander, and who knows? I'm sure somebody will be able to break it in Legacy or Vintage or Modern, something like that. So those formats get really crazy with cards like this. So we'll see how it goes. But I think that is it for blue. Yes, and we go back to our comments. So that'll do it for blue. Hope you enjoyed the review. Lots of cards to cover and more to come. Next up, if we're going to be hitting black, that'll be exciting, especially since the theme behind Dominaria United is Phyrexia. So black will have a lot of juicy evil cards that we can cover, but that will help your decks. So we'll see you for the black video, and we'll see you next time.